Hello, hello. You are listening to episode 38 of the Learn and Work Smarter podcast. At the time that I'm recording this, it is late August, and there is a huge back to school vibe in the air, and I absolutely love it. In fact, I have always loved back to school season, and I view it kind of how most people view New Year's Day. Fresh systems, fresh starts, fresh pens, if you've ever met me. Anyway, I did have a conversation with a client the other day, and that is the inspiration for today's episode. So this is a student who is headed into his senior year of college, and he wrapped up a summer internship in the field that he's interested in, which is business. And he was candidly telling me that the internship was a lot harder than he expected it to be. He was saying that the internship people expected him to know how to do things that he didn't know how to do, and this made him uncomfortable. It kind of shook his confidence a little, and it got him doubting and thinking, like, do I even know what I'm doing? Am I even cut out for this business thing? And then from there, this is in one of our sessions, he started asking me about, questions about starting my own business, and did I do any internships, and essentially how did I know how to start my own business? And it's funny because I have a master's degree in special education. I've been an educator for nearly 20 years, and I've worked in corporate America. I have worked in the public and private sector for education. And when people ask me what I do, my instinct is obviously to say I'm an educator. Or actually, I'll use the word executive function coach. We talked about that in I think it was episode 36. But anyway, almost never do I say I'm a business owner. It is odd because I did create the idea for my business out of thin air. The idea for School Habits literally woke me up in the middle of the night one night, and I couldn't go back to sleep. I became obsessed with building out a vision that I had in my head. And that was in 2016 when I launched School Habits as a company. And now I have a full-blown product and service-based business and a podcast. And it's just weird because I never ever really think I'm a business person. And so when the student asked me about how I started my business, like what were the steps I took, I was almost like, why are you asking me? Like, I'm just a teacher, right? But today's episode is about how to be resourceful. So what is the connection here? What is the connection between the story I just told you about, the conversation I had with this client earlier, with this student in the internship that was harder than he thought it was going to be, and me starting a business? Now, the truth is that when I created my business from the ground up, I literally had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out. I figured it out every single step along the way. Heck, I'm still figuring it out. Like, I do not have everything all figured out by any means. That's not my point. But, some things worked, some things didn't. But I never stopped trying to figure things out. And then here we are. And what is the ability to figure things out? It is called resourcefulness. Now, if you've listened to a couple episodes so far of this podcast, thank you for being here. But episode 11, which are the 6 most important skills for school and work, we actually talk about resourcefulness in that episode. Resourcefulness is a superpower. In fact, it's one of absolutely the top skills that is required to succeed in a low stress, sort of sustainable way in school and in work. So what do we do when we find ourselves in the position that my student found himself in for his internship, right? Not knowing how to do things, but knowing that they have to get done, or maybe in my personal case that they want it to get done, or people expect that you know how to do them. How do we become resourceful? And that, my friends, is what we are talking about today. Hello, you are listening to the Learn and Work Smarter podcast. The podcast for students and professionals who want to learn and work smarter. I'm your host, executive function coach, and founder of schoolhabits.com, Katie Azevedo. As a reminder, everything I mention in today's episode will be linked in the show notes, including a link to the transcript, which you can also find at learnandworksmarter.com/podcast. All right, so there is good news and bad news about developing resourcefulness. The bad news is that there is no one little button thing that we can just, a switch that we can click on and click off, and then suddenly we have a roadmap to figure out how to do all the things, right? In fact, if that were possible, I don't even think I would flip that switch on, because what's the fun in that? But the good news is that resourcefulness is a skill. And if you learn anything on the Learn and Work Smarter podcast, it should be that skills can be taught. That's the good news. So if your resourcefulness skill is not at the level that you want it to be or that it needs to be, which is usually indicated by you feeling like everyone around you knows what they're doing and you're the only one who doesn't, you feel stuck, it feels like everyone else has some sort of like secret knowledge that you don't have, right? Those are all signs that you have not yet developed this skill around how to figure things out. Okay, so let's start with a foundational principle of resourcefulness. And like it or not, that is mindset. I know, mindset gets a bad rep, but it's foundational. The people with the greatest problem-solving skills and resourcefulness truly believe that there is a solution to every problem. I don't know about you, but I grew up with both of my parents telling me that there was a solution to every problem. Now, did this wisdom magically solve any of my problems on the spot? It absolutely did not, and I probably rolled my eyes every single time, knowing me, that they said it to me. But over time, that message got ingrained. All right, I began to internalize the idea that if I was stuck, if I was facing a block, if I didn't know how to do something that I wanted to do, I truly believed that there was a way somewhere. There was a map somewhere. There was a solution somewhere. Because let's flip this on its head for a minute. If you do not believe in your heart of hearts that there is a solution to every problem, then you are 100% right. If you don't truly believe that all problems are meant to be solved, then you will never be the one to find the solution and figure it out. All right, so I'm going to use the example of my student that I mentioned earlier in this episode. The student who's actually the inspiration for this episode. I'm going to use a lot of examples from his very real scenario to illustrate some of the concepts I'm going to talk about today. Starting with this idea that you have to have the fundamental belief that problems can be solved. I asked for his permission to use the example, and I told him that I wouldn't use his real name, but we're going to call him Matthew. All right, Matthew. So one specific problem that Matthew shared with me was that as part of his internship, he was expected to take some data that was handed to him. Okay, he wasn't supposed to collect it, just take it and put it into some kind of spreadsheet and make some tables or graphs from that data. He was not asked to extract business intelligence from that data or analyze it in any way. Just take the data, put it into an Excel sheet, and then use the functions inside Excel to create some kind of graph or visual representation. But he had no idea how to do this. He was not required to use Excel in high school, and he certainly didn't know how to turn data into any sort of table inside that program. If Matthew demonstrated low resourcefulness, he would have told himself, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this, and therefore I'm not going to be able to do it. But instead, he demonstrated resourcefulness, and he said, okay, I don't know how to do this yet, but obviously there is a solution and a roadmap that I just have to find. Right? I asked Matthew actually what he did in this scenario, and he said he tried everything. He said it took him forever, but he found a channel on YouTube that was all about Excel basics, and then he figured it out. My point here is that resourcefulness started with him believing that there was an answer out there. Now, I get it. In this Excel example, it is so black and white and step by step and very like how to, right? He literally could have just inserted into Google or typed into Google or YouTube or whatever, how to create a table in Excel, and he could have gotten the answer. But hold up, back to my scenario of creating my business. Okay, this is less black and white. My question was, how do I start a business out of nothing? All right, if I Googled that, I probably would have come up with a million different results leading me in a million different directions. So I know that some scenarios are not as simple as Googling how to do XYZ. But it still starts with recognizing that there is some kind of answer out there somewhere. So this actually brings us to my second point about being resourceful, which is to start somewhere. How do you ever know that you are stuck if you don't start somewhere? You have to begin by taking the teeny tiniest first step in some kind of direction for you to even get to the point where you say, yep, I cannot move any further. If you have made no action in any direction, you cannot claim that you're stuck, because that is not a lack of resourcefulness. That is a lack of action and effort. back to Matthew's example with the Excel spreadsheet. All right, so when he was asked to create something like a graph or a chart or something inside Excel, he knew in the back of his mind that he didn't know how to do it. But there was an answer out there, but he still took some kind of action out of the gate. He didn't just go up to his boss and say, I don't know how to do that, right? No one's looking for that professional. He opened up Excel, he started playing around with the tables and adding numbers, and in his words, he made a total mess, right? But he had to start somewhere to figure out that he couldn't go any further. Now, the example in my business, if I had just had the idea, as I said, I had it at night and I woke up and I couldn't go back to sleep, and if I didn't do anything with that, then that's where my idea would have died in my head. Did I know how to start a business? Of course I did not. Did I know what I didn't know? Of course I did not. But I remember taking a piece of paper and writing out some sort of like mind map of what I pictured it looking like. I actually still have this piece of paper. I saved it. There were 3 prongs coming out of school habits that I had put in the middle. One branch was like videos and blogs and tutorials. One branch was private sessions. And the third branch was digital products. Did I know how to do any of that besides private sessions? No idea. I never created a video or a digital product in my life. But if I hadn't started just by sitting down with a pen and paper and making some kind of mind map, I never would have known that the first place to start would be, okay, well, how do I make a video to put on YouTube, right? Let's say that you're a student and you were asked to write a lab report based on, some experiment you did. And let's say for whatever reason you have never written a lab report and your teacher maybe didn't give you good instructions, or like you missed the class where the instructions were given. I don't know. A non-resourceful student would say, I don't know how to do it, so I won't. Every single teacher out there will see that as a lack of effort. But the resourceful student will say, okay, I don't know how to write a lab report, but I know how to do a Google search for how to write a lab report. All right, so that's a step in some kind of direction, which could potentially lead that student to saying, oh, okay, I do know how to write the first part of a lab report because maybe I found that in my notes somewhere, but maybe I'm cloudy on how to present this information in a table. All right, so that would be the next step, and that might be to create a table for your data. And if you don't know how to do that, then you would Google that. But my point is that you won't know what you're stuck on or even that you're stuck unless you take the teeny tiniest step in some kind of direction. All right, the next step is to identify the wall. The wall is actually, it's a silly little term that I use to describe the point of not actually being able to go any further with your current resources. So I'm going to go back to Matthew for an example. I'm going to use another story that he shared with me. As part of his internship, he was asked to make phone calls, terrifying, I know, to current clients as part of, I think it was like a quarterly outreach initiative or something, but he was supposed to call clients and ask them if they wanted to set up their, I'm going to say quarterly, I can't remember, but quarterly meeting in person or in Zoom. Now, according to my student, this was the most terrifying part of this internship because he was skilled at writing emails, but he didn't have much experience with phone calls. He procrastinated on this task until it was causing him so much anxiety that he had no choice but to do it. Plus, there was a deadline. And that's when he realized that not only did he not know what to say, but he had actually forgotten where that customer data was stored. The names, the phone numbers, right, of the people he was asked to call. He said he was given that information, he thought, but he couldn't remember if it was in a meeting or an email or maybe like a piece of paper he was handed. Was he supposed to have like login credentials, so like a customer database? He couldn't remember. So what did he do? He could have gone directly to a supervisor and said, hey, where are those phone numbers again? Okay, but that is not the approach that someone at his level should take. And when I say his level, I mean like internship, right? So if you're like full-blown professional here, we're not doing that. While it is okay to ask for help, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, actually that is the topic of episode 39, the one after this, which I'm about to record, okay? But we have to take some action first. So he started by going into his emails and searching for anything that could look like a spreadsheet or a PDF, phone numbers or a login information to the customer database, and he found it. Get this, it was actually in an Excel spreadsheet that someone else had created and shared with him. But he identified the wall just by diving in somewhere. Let's talk about identifying the wall in academia. All right, so let's say that you've been assigned 10 math problems and you can do 1 through 4 no problem at all. I've used a similar example like this before. I can't remember if it was like a YouTube video or one of my blogs or whatever. Just bear with me if you've heard it before. All right, so there's 10 math problems. You get to question 5 and it's so much harder than 1 through 4. Like you can do 1 through 4, no problem. Question 5, you're like, what am I doing? A student who lacks resourcefulness would say, okay, this is hard. I can't do this. I'm just going to ask the teacher tomorrow. I don't know how to do it. But that is not the approach. That's not the level that Learn and Work Smarter listeners are at. I see you. Okay, so what would a resourceful student do? They would identify the wall. They would try to identify the exact place where cognitively they were unable to go any further. Is all of question 5 impossible to solve? Or can you get to a certain point through question 5 and then you get stuck? Okay, what specific part of question 5 do you not understand? Where is the exact point where your understanding of the problem or your next steps crumble? And this is exactly where our previous step comes in too. Just starting somewhere, because if our student didn't even attempt question 5, then they would never get to the point of being able to pinpoint where they hit that wall. So starting somewhere is the critical step that has to happen before you can even find the wall, right? Let me give you a tip here that is like the more specific you get when identifying the wall, the better you'll be able to figure out what resources to use or to consult or to look for to get the answer. So sticking with this math example, let's say you try question 5 and let's say it's some kind of algebra equation or whatever. I'm making this up on the spot, but let's say that questions 1 through 4 are solving equations with 1 variable, and then question 5, you notice that there are 2 variables. So you jump in, you start somewhere, and you solve the 2 variable equation. This is question 5, right? Using what you know about single variable equations, right? You get as far as you can go. But as you imagine, that's obviously only going to get you so far. And now you have identified that your specific wall is how to solve 2 variable equations. Perfect. That is going to bring you to the next step, which is actually to begin using your resources. Okay, this is where the resourcefulness magic happens. So if you were to use the biggest resource that is available to everybody at their fingertips, you would just Google how to solve multivariable equations or 2 variable equations. But if you didn't get that far, you would end up with Googling something like how to solve math equations. And that's not going to get you the answer that you need, right? So this next step for figuring things out or, becoming resourceful involves taking what you've identified as your wall and using that as the starting point to find your answer. And this is where you go into your resources available to you. Okay, and those depend on what your situation is. In the case of Matthew and his phone calls, that meant going into his email inbox and rummaging through the papers on his little makeshift desk that they gave him, looking in all of the places where information could potentially be hiding. In the case of trying to figure out how to do question 5 in your math homework, right? That could mean going into your textbook and looking at the index or maybe at the table of contents and finding the section that shows you how to solve multivariable equations. You would open to that section, find the example problem, try to solve your homework question, following the steps in the example problem, right? If you didn't have your textbook, you could obviously resort to Google or YouTube. Or you could use your notes. Oh my gosh, right? If you follow my note-taking tips for taking notes that are easy to study from. On my School Habits YouTube channel, I have a video called How to Take Notes That Are Easy to Study From, where I teach you exactly how to take notes that are, get this, really easy to study from, okay? And they become really good resources for your homework and assignments. This is relevant because we're talking about being resourceful. In the case of my business example, I identified one of my walls. There were many, trust me, but I identified one of them as not knowing how to film videos or create a YouTube channel at all. So those are technically two different things, but I started with one and I Googled how to make a YouTube channel and I followed the steps. All right, but let's be real. Sometimes you need to have these little micro resourcefulness moments inside of a larger resourcefulness moment. So in my process of figuring out how to make a YouTube channel, I realized, this is really like basic example, but I needed a YouTube banner image. Did I know how to do that? No, I had no idea. So I Googled how to make a YouTube banner image, and I found the name of a software program that would help me do that, like a graphic design program. I use Canva. But I didn't know how to use Canva. I had no idea. So I found a YouTube video that taught me how to use Canva so that I could make a YouTube banner image for my YouTube channel that I was still in the middle of trying to figure out how to do. Did that take me forever? Yes, it did. All right. But when it came time to create my YouTube channel for the Learn and Work Smarter podcast, that's a separate channel, I knew how to do it. For me, the lesson is in the struggle. Not that we want to always be struggling, but I don't know. Sometimes that is the point. Now, in the case of starting my business and YouTube channel, I obviously used Google, but I also looked at my other available resources. I knew what my resources were. I did not have any friends at all in the digital business space, so there were not any people I could consult. But I did drink from the podcast fire hose. I remember going on these long walks. I'm talking 2 hours long, listening to business podcasts and taking notes on my phone. And then I would come home and I would take actions on those strategies. In a perfect world, I would have had a business mentor, someone who could, walk me through it, but that wasn't the scenario. If I had somebody, then that would be considered a resource. Maybe in your scenario, you have different resources that you can use. Part of being resourceful means you know what your resources are and you know how to identify what has the potential to be a resource. You know where to look. Now, let me give you another example that's connected to the early stages of my business. I am a creative person, so I wanted to design my own logo for School Habits. If you haven't seen it before, it's an S and an H, and it's like a pencil in the shape of a pencil that goes through it. So there's an eraser and a tip, and I drew it on a piece of paper. But I had absolutely no idea how to get this paper digitized, into the computer. So what I did is I obviously started by Googling how to get a digital logo on the computer. In one of the results, I know that sounds absolutely absurd, but I'm pretty sure I literally Googled how to turn a drawing into a digital drawing or something like that. And one of the search results that came back was this website called Fiverr, Fiverr. So it was this kind of freelance website where people offered their services. And back then, all jobs were $5. It's not anymore, but back then everything was $5. And I hired some random graphic designer across the globe to take my hand-drawn logo, which I just took a picture of with my camera and emailed it to him, and he made it digital. Did I know how to use Fiverr? I did not. Did I know if it was a scam? Definitely did not know that. But I had faith. But in my notes I had taken on one of my podcast walks, I had also written the word Fiverr. So I must have heard it from somewhere. And I think that made me feel like I trusted it more or whatever. But when it came back as a search result, I was like, oh, I wrote that somewhere. So my two instances of being resourceful kind of clicked together and helped me get over my wall. Now, another example or another tip for being resourceful is to watch others. Not directly ask people around you for help. Again, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's a time and place for that. Episode 39, I give you strategies for how to ask for help because it's okay to do that, right? But if you're at a certain level in academia or in your professional space, you are kind of expected to handle things on your own at first. You're expected to figure things out to a degree on your own before you send an SOS to somebody else and have them stop what they're doing to assist you with something that's technically part of your job description. So what do I mean by watch others? I'm hearing right now how a little creepy that sounds. So let's change that to maybe let others be your model. I don't know if that's any better, but you get the idea. So let other people inspire you or watch what other people are doing. That makes better sense. Watch what people are doing. So let's go back to Matthew's internship example. He never actually said that making phone calls for him ended up being a challenge. I don't remember that being part of the conversation, but let's say that he had the phone numbers, but that his wall was that he didn't know how to interact professionally with someone on a phone in order to set up their quarterly review, right? At this level, he should know how to communicate over the phone. I remember him being nervous about it, but not that he struggled to actually do it when push came to shove. But he was just like, oh gosh, I'm so used to writing emails. I don't know if I can do the phone thing. I think there was just nerves, but it didn't actually stop him from doing it. But anyways, let's say that hypothetically he did struggle with phone communication. Okay. So instead of turning to a supervisor and saying, hey, can you help me write a script to use on the phone? Could you teach me step by step how to do this? Instead of doing that, he could listen to his colleagues who are also making phone calls in the office. He could just sort of low key listen in on other people in the office on the phone, taking notes on what kinds of, greetings they use, what type of tone and language that they're using that align with their company. How did they close phone calls? What was the average length of a phone call? No, Matthew might not have gotten all of the answers he needed just from observing others on the phone, but it absolutely counts as being resourcefulness because it's taking action in some kind of direction with the intention of either figuring it out or identifying a specific wall. So hypothetically, let's say that Matthew picked up some tips from observing his colleagues, but he didn't want to royally mess up his internship, so he wanted to run it by his manager first. Good call. Because in that case, it would be perfectly reasonable for Matthew to approach his manager and say, hi, I'm looking for a little guidance on these phone calls. I watched someone, so-and-so on the phone. And from these observations, I have crafted this general script for my own phone calls. All right, I'm planning to open my phone calls this way. I'm going to close my calls this way. I'm going to keep them this length or whatever. Do you have any input? Am I going in the right direction? Okay, now, from the manager's perspective, that looks like pretty darn good resourcefulness. That looks like a potential employee trying to figure something out with enough self-awareness to know that this could use a boss check before it's all systems go. Now, this podcast episode is about being resourceful, and so I don't want to go too far into the topic of how to ask for help. Because again, I said that's the topic of the next episode, episode 39. That's kind of an extension of resourcefulness. But let me just leave it here that if you are resourceful to a point and then you need to ask for help, there is a way to do that so that you get the exact kind of help that you need and you present yourself still as capable and skilled. One final tip. I'm sure that at some point I'm going to create a future episode that dives deeper into this topic, but I want to bring up the concept of SOPs, standard operating procedures. Standard operating procedures are sort of how-to manuals for individual tasks or processes that either you do on a regular basis or that people in the company do. It's basically the way that, it's kind of like a how-to manual, right? You sometimes you're given SOPs, sometimes you can create your own. I have actually mentioned them briefly on this podcast before, but they fit in here perfectly with this conversation about resourcefulness. Because if you went through the entire process of how to, figure out how to do something, and let's say it was complicated and there were multiple steps, it would be wise to make yourself an SOP from that process. This would mean that after you have figured out the steps to do something, you create yourself a simple document, I don't know, something in Google or Google Docs, right? Something like how to create a table in Excel, how to create a banner image in Canva, right? Because resourcefulness often takes time, like a lot of time and a lot of effort until you're more comfortable with the thing that you were trying to figure out. And your future self will be so grateful if your current self took a few minutes to write up the steps that you took so much time and effort to figure out, so that the next time you have to, create a table in Excel or find customer data or write a lab report, you'll have a step-by-step how-to manual somewhere in your digital space that you created for yourself. In this way, you become your own resource. Now, I'm going to recap the steps real quickly here, but you'll remember that the final step is consult your resources. And the ultimate sign of success is when you are your own best resource. So let's take this from the top. Tip 1 is to firmly and truly believe that there is a solution to every problem. You must believe that there is an answer out there and that you will find it. The next step is to take some kind of action in some direction. The benefit of this is that we often know more than we think we do. And so sometimes we're not even stuck It's just that we never even started, and that feels like stuckness. But the second benefit is it allows you to get to the point where you can identify, okay, this is where I can't go any further. And that's actually tip 3, which is to identify the wall. Get super specific about what exact thing you are stuck on. Put words to it. And remember, you can't do this until you take some kind of action in some kind of direction. And then next is to identify and use your resources. This is obviously Google, it's YouTube, it's your textbook, it's your notes, it's employee manuals, it's your SOPs created already by your colleagues or your company or ones that you created. Any repository of information besides your boss or your professor that has the potential to have an answer. And then lastly, the bonus tip is to create SOPs for yourself for all of the processes that you know you're going to have to repeat at some point again in the future. Build a collection of these resources, these how-to resources, so that you will, by the end of the day, become your own best resource. And if you go through this whole process and you are still stuck and you do need to ask for help, there's no shame in that. And I want you to use the strategies that I teach you in episode 39. All right, my friends, that takes us to the end of today's episode. Remember that all of the links I referenced can be found at learnandworksmarter.com/podcast/38. They're also in the description box if you are listening to this on the Learn and Work Smarter YouTube channel, or they are in the show notes if you are listening to this in a podcast app. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here with me. I appreciate you, and never stop learning.